Hi everyone. Well, I hope this finds you well. It's been a long time since we last met, and I hope that things are fine on your side with this epidemic or pandemic, as we call it. And well, first, let me say that you have to, of course, take care of yourself, and but also you have to be joyous and to enjoy life. You have to know, of course, that this is not the end of the world, as they say. This is something that happened many times before in history to many people before. So it's not unprecedented as many people think. Well, probably the only thing that's unprecedented about this pandemic is the fact that it is in the whole world. It's global, and at the same time, I believe that this is in history unprecedented. But of course, plagues appeared many times in history for thousands of years and hundreds of years. Uh, Millions of people died because of plagues, and famous rulers and kings died. But so what I'd like to say is that this is not something unprecedented. It's something that happened before, and we have to deal with it. We have to find a kind of way to survive. Not only, from the physical point of view, but also on the level of psychology. You have to be joyous, you have to enjoy life, and you have to try to manage within, of course, the circumstances that we are all in today. It's very important to also think about your psychological health. And you are young, of course, and you are strong, and so you just have to find a new way to survive. It's not like before, but of course, it's not the end of the world. Yeah, and one last thing about this kind of introduction is that also you have to think probably about sports. You have to do some physical exercise. It's very important for the psychological health and also the physical health. And of course, when you sweat and when you make physical effort, even at home, of course, you can do that. That's very important, and it will benefit you a lot. Well, so in one word, this is something that happened before in history, and it reminds me, for example, of the plague that took place in Egypt, or about thousands of years ago. It's called the Plague of Egypt, and it's mainly described in the Bible in the book of Exodus, when God actually asked Moses to tell his people, the Jewish people, to tell them, of course, that there was a plague to happen that's going to kill the firstborn. Why I'm telling you this story? Because I have always found it very interesting, because there are similarities that we can find today in our world, and mainly in the Tunisian culture. I'll tell you about it just in the guise of an introduction. So he God told Moses to tell his people that there would be a pestilence that's going to kill the firstborn child in every household, and that in order to save your firstborn child, you have to give an offering to God, an offering in the form of the firstborn animal that you have at home, sheep or cow or anything. It should be male, by the way, and you have to kill it. And the interesting thing is that you have to actually use the blood of that animal, uh, and to actually mark the door of that house with Fatma's hand, what we call Fatma's hands, or the palm of your hand with the blood of that animal. This is described in the Bible thousands of years ago, and you know, of course, Tunisians, that we have this today in our culture. Of course, I don't use it myself. I don't do it, but we know that many people do it. Of course, when they buy a new car or a new house, they do this. And it's of course the belief that it's going to protect that house, it's going to protect that family. So you see, something that we're doing that some Tunisians do today, of course, and its origin is in the Bible about thousands of years ago. So it's very, interesting how things, of course, are transmitted from one generation to another generation throughout centuries and centuries. Like the issue of the evil eye, which is not new. It's actually historians and specialists, of course, found it in the pharaoh culture. The idea that there could be an evil eye and that you have to protect yourself from the evil eye. Very interesting thing. We call the hand is called Fatma's hand in Islamic culture, but it existed even before the life of Fatma and before Islam, so it's something very old. Well, this is about the beliefs of people and how the people try to protect themselves. But of course, today we're waiting for the for the scientists to find a solution to the coronavirus today, and I'm sure it's going to be over soon. So you have just to be patient, have protect yourself, but also be joyous, enjoy life, enjoy the things that we can do. You see that we're very lucky today that we can use technology. It's not like, of course, ancient plagues where confinement existed, of course, with these civilizations in the Middle Ages, and millions of people died, and kings and rulers died because of plagues. So it's just to say that it's not new. You have to try to manage, to try to survive, and that's it. So just to start speaking about our course, it's of course, as you know, on the American Civil War. We had a number of lectures and we dealt mainly with the pre-war period, pre-Civil War period, but also we dealt with the causes of the war, various causes of the war, but also we can have a kind of, since of course it's been a while since we last met, we can have a kind of reminder, a recall what we have seen in just 5 or 10 minutes before we move to something new. So just to recap what we have seen about the causes and the pre-war period, the status quo in the United States before the war started. Uh, of course, the war was between South and North, and the main issue, as you know, as I told you many times, of course, was slavery. Most historians agree that slavery was the key issue, the key cause of the war, but also, of course, we have to understand that it's not the only cause, but or at least that there are other layers behind that main issue of slavery. Mainly, of course, the differences, or what we could call, even using the language of today, the disparities between the North and South, or differences between North and South. Because, as I told you, the North, of course, was more, first of all, more populated than the South. It's very normal. The East also was much more populated than the West. I told you about the first settlements, of course, that took place on the eastern coast before people started to migrate towards the west of the United States. Large areas, I told you, it's like a continent. But in addition to being more populated than the South, the North was more industrialized. You know, the 19th century was also the century of the Industrial Revolution in Britain and other parts of the world. New machines and new technologies at that time, of course, not the technologies of today, but new things, new machines were used in agriculture, in industry, in farming, and also in manufacturing. The North, of course, had more of these than the South. And even when it comes to agriculture, the had just small farms, not very big plantations. So in the South, there were less population, of course, less people, fewer people, and less modernization, less manufacturing. And at the same time, there were big, very large plantations, big lands for agriculture, probably the largest in the world. Until today, of course, they have very large plantations, and this required, of course, the use of manpower or slaves. And so, as I said, the issue of slavery, which is, of course, presented as the main cause of the Civil War, had different layers behind it or beneath. It is what we have to remember. I think is that the slavery issue is not 100% an issue of human rights, an issue of ethics, an issue of equality between all human beings. At that time, of course, for the South, it was also mainly a business issue. Slave owners had thousands of slaves, and these thousands of slaves were the equivalent of thousands of dollars or hundreds of thousands of dollars. And of course, abolishing slavery simply meant that you're going to be deprived of your money, of your wealth. So, of course, because human beings were, I mean, treated as products, as let's say commodities, which is something very sad, but it's real. So that was, of course, I believe, the main difference between North and South. For we could say that people in the North, and politicians, decision makers in the North, including Abraham Lincoln, for instance, were probably believed more in human rights, and that's probably real, because of course, as I told you, since the War of Independence and the Revolution, and the founding fathers who believed in human rights, who believed in the philosophy of the Enlightenment, that they were influenced by les Lumières in France, or French Lumières, and also philosophers of the Enlightenment in Europe. They were influenced by them and their ideas, of course, of human rights and freedom, etc. But something else very important is the fact that in the beginning of the 19th century, or let's say in the 1820s and 1830s, there was a new culture in the whole world, a culture of emancipation, abolishing slavery. Of course, there was uh, many countries in the world, slavery was abolished by the during the 1930s, let's say, and you could imagine that this embarrassed the leaders of the United States. The United States, which was born as a country, as free land, as a free country, to founding fathers who spoke about equality between all people, that all people are born equal, and those human rights and those values and universal values and notions, etc. So now you still have slavery. This is embarrassing, of course. And this is, I believe, what led, of course, to the emancipation of slaves in the North, in the northern states, sorry. But at the same time, states in the South did not abolish slavery, and this is, of course, why the war then followed. The states that were called free states, which means in which slavery was abolished, they tried to influence states in the South. They tried to exercise power, and there were rumors that the Congress, of course, under the impact and under the influence of northern politicians, is going to was going to abolish slavery on the whole, in the whole nation. Another issue was slavery in the territories. As you know, of course, the United States of the 19th century is not the United States of today. Today there are 50 states. That time they were not 50, because in the very beginning they were 13, by the way. Because, of course, a lot of the lands in the middle, the center of the country today, and also in the west, were not states, were just territories. When we say territories, it means lands that used to belong to different states. And also the question was, when these should we have a slavery in these territories or not, and when these territories would become states, and because they became states later, would they be slave states or non-slave states? And this was also a matter of struggle between the two forces, pro-slavery forces and anti-slavery forces. As I said, the the world at that time, of course, had different countries in the world had different relations, and the United States, of course, was embarrassed by the abolition that took place in many countries of the world in the 1830s. For example, in Tunisia, as I told you, Tunisia was one of the countries that abolished slavery very early, earlier than in the United States and in many other countries in the world. It was by a decision of the Bey of Tunisia. His name was Ahmed Bey. These two, there were two beys in Tunisia that are today remembered as good ones, because there was kind of tension between the beys and the people of Tunisia. But two beys are remembered as good beys. They are Ahmed Bey, who actually abolished slavery, and also Munsaf Bey, very famous market in the capital. So I said in Tunisia, slavery was abolished in 1846, and it was very early. Uh, but at the same time, we had in the United States politicians, of course, who really wanted the federal government to take the decision of prohibiting slavery. And states in the South, mainly South Carolina, Mississippi, Florida, Texas, they, even I'm speaking about the period before the war, of course, they actually warned the federal government against the prohibition of slavery. And South Carolina, for instance, in addition to other states, they used to believe and to declare that it is the right of the state to decide for itself. We speak about the state's rights. So this is also another issue about behind one of the causes of the Civil War. It is broader than the issue of slavery, but it includes the issue of slavery. What is this issue? The issue is the relationship between federal government and state governments. The issue between the relationship between what is federal, central government, and what is local or regional. And this, of course, not an easy issue, by the way, including slavery, because slavery also, if we think about slavery, who's going to decide? Who has the right to decide? Is it the federal government or the state itself? Each state could decide by itself. States in the South, they believed, of course, that they had the right to decide by themselves. And as I said, this is a big issue because, of course, it appears in any union in the world. That's a human nature. I mean, in any union, you can think about any union you want, whether existing union or a potential union. If we think about a potential Maghreb union, for instance, of course, this is one of the most important issues to be debated, the prerogatives, the powers that should go to the central government of that union, and the prerogatives of powers that should go to the local governments, to the state governments, etc. And here, of course, we may have different opinions. And these different opinions and these different choices, of course, would define the kind of union that we're going to have. We may think about the European Union, for instance, and what's happening today in the debate. So that was, I believe, one of the most important issues to be debated and to be decided during the war and after the war. So this is in general, of course, the general atmosphere. So you have to keep in mind that there were free states without slavery before the war, way before the Civil War, and there were also slave states way before the Civil War, and it was like a borderline between the free world and the slave world, so to speak. A borderline, it was like a frontier. And as I told you, there are many accounts and many stories about slaves from the south who tried to run away and to flee to the north, which meant running away or fleeing to freedom. For thousands of slaves tried to win their freedom by fleeing to the north, including the very famous account of that man, Henry Box or Henry Box Brown, who, of course, very interesting story when he, of course, nailed himself in a box to the north in order to be free, and he succeeded in this enterprise, and many people started to try to do like him. Some of them, of course, did not succeed. But there are many also slaves who died on the way to the north. Many, of course, tragedies that took place, and a lot of books and a lot of accounts speak about such stories. And you can here, of course, we can mention literature, novels, and poetry. A lot of account and historical accounts, of course, diaries, of course, and a lot of literature that was written on this. And if you are interested, of course, you can read on all this. Uh, so now let's speak about how the real fighting started and why it started. Of course, sorry. Of course, as we described, there was tension between South and North about slavery and about other issues. related in one way or another to slavery. But there is a big difference between tension, between disagreement, and real war, real fight, and real killing. Civil, and we're speaking about a civil war, which means a war inside the country between people, between citizens of the same country. That is probably the worst scenarios of wars because we are not speaking about strangers who are trying to kill each other, but we're speaking about citizens of the same nation who are trying to kill each other. And by the way, just not to forget that over 600,000 people died after the war, during the war. I mean, the death toll by the end of the war was at over 600,000 people, soldiers mainly. And so the fighting, real fighting and confrontation took place before the war itself. But it was not a comprehensive war. It was not a complete war before 1861. There were fightings sorry, in different places because of the slavery issue. And until the real war, the complete war between the forces of the Union and the forces of the Confederacy started, 1861. So here and there were different battles, different violent incidents, and mainly there was what used to be called Bleeding Kansas, the state of Kansas today. At that time, it was not a state; it was just territory. And so I told you that in some territories the issue was when we are going to become state, should we become a slave state or a non-slave state? This is of course related to Kansas, for instance. So, so the federal government, the Congress at that time, uh, actually enacted an act about this decision whether